So my name is Janet Farrer. I'm one of the vice chairs of the Further Education Committee, and I'm soon to be vice president of UCU, just over a week's time. I'm going to be chairing the meeting today, so it's really nice to see so many people here. I also work in an FE college. I'm feeling some of your pain, I should imagine, at the minute. I'd like to introduce Andrew Harden, who's the head of FE, who will be talking first, and then Alex Lancaster, who's the head of health and safety. She'll be coming on after that. And we're also joined by my co-vice chair of FEC, which is Sean Vernell, who's unfortunately got some camera issues, but he's just going to bring us up to date on some things that are happening at his college. Then we're going to have to we were going to try and do it as a question and answer, but I'm sure you can understand we're going to have hundreds of people here. Excuse me a second. We're going to have hundreds of people here, so it's going to be impossible to try and field the questions. So we've got some pre-prepared questions that come from the common themes that are coming through the regional offices and through the national office also, or through to Alex and to other people in the team that are getting those through. So we're going to hopefully we'll answer the main things that you have got. However, those of you who can access the chat pane, which, just as a reminder, if I know some of you have actually got a kind of greyed out issue, but for the most part, it's if you hover your mouse in the middle of the screen, you get a toolbar and there's a little square shaped speech bubble that you can click on, and hopefully you can see the chat pane there. So someone's just put out, it's going to be really hard for me to look at any comments, to be honest, while I'm trying to present, but someone's just put on something saying that there are some number limits for some people that wanted to attend. That's absolutely right. With the part of the technical issues we've had, we tried to do it as a different kind of webinar on Teams, which allowed for a lot more people. Unfortunately, because of the issues that we've had to revert back to normal Teams that has a cap of 250 people. So that's why we're going to be recording the meeting, which I'll come on to in a second, and we'll obviously this won't be the first one of these that we'll do, and hopefully you can go back to your branches and report back to people. So coming back to the format, if people have additional questions, if you can put them in the chat pane, but can I ask you to not use the chat pane for anything other than questions? Obviously, given the time limits and the situation and the number of participants, we're not going to be able to take those questions during the meeting, but we'll make sure that they update the advice that is already on the UCU website. And just from a personal point of view, I'll just recommend that you do have a good look at the COVID section on the UCU website, because there's loads of good stuff on there and loads of really good guidance on there. Okay, so we're going to have to finish at 8 o'clock. It's going to be strictly 1 hour. The format is going to be that Andrew will speak, I'm hoping, unless he's having some technical issues. Andrew will speak, and then Alex Lancaster.
I've just had a word with Andrew, and he's unable to unmute his microphone at the moment, so we might have to change the running order slightly, but we're working on it. Sorry to interrupt.
Don't apologise, Greg, that's fine. Well, you know, I made the mistake of saying it'd be all right on the night, and it clearly won't. So, Greg, are you going to be able to stand in for Andrew if we can't resolve that issue?
I'll be a very poor replacement, but I will be able to say a few things, yeah, and then hopefully we'll get Andrew on after Alex has spoken.
Okay, we'll see if we can, or you can just write, just Bob Dylan style, you can just write it on pieces of paper and hold it up one by one. That would work. Okay, thank you for that. So hopefully we'll get Andrew back. If not, then obviously we will hear from Alex Lancaster. So sorry, I'm a little bit flustered now. Yeah, can I just really repeat about the chat pane? If you do have access to the chat pane, please only use it for putting questions in there. We will try and answer them through the frequently asked questions and the other guidance that we've got on the website. But it'd be really good to hear those questions, because there might be things that haven't been considered yet. In addition to the COVID section on the UCU website, please don't use this webinar as an alternative to contacting your regional office and accessing those support structures or your devolved nations office, because those support structures are in place for a reason, and your regional officials and devolved nation officials want to know what's going on in your institutions. So hopefully this will answer some of the questions that you've got, but it may be that, for example, in risk assessments that are happening in your institution might need to be looked at by people who work for UCU. And when you're contacting the regional offices at the minute and your devolved nations offices, just bear in mind that they're having to prioritise return to work questions and health and safety questions that are coming in rather than anything else at the minute. Okay, so in terms of practical issues, I think you've probably gathered already, the technical issues are already happening, but can I ask that everybody mutes their microphone and keeps it muted unless you are speaking? And actually, it would help from an accessibility point of view if you can, as nice as it is to see so many lovely faces and people's gardens even, awesome, could I ask that you turn your camera off and your microphone off if you're not speaking, because it just helps with accessibility, so that would be excellent. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I can see that Andrew's on the phone, so I don't think that he's going to be able to join us just yet. So, Alex, would you like to start?
Hello, can you hear me?
Thankfully, yes.
Oh, thankfully, yeah. Okay, so the aim of today was really to take you through the latest FE guidance, which has been sent via email. It's on the website, as Janet has indicated. And we recognise, I suppose, the urgency of the situation currently in the workplaces, where employers are beginning to have discussions around what a return to work could look like. And in doing that, they're engaging with our branch reps and asking them to comment on risk assessments. And of course, this is causing a lot of panic. We have, a lot of health and safety reps out there who are really great at their job, but we do have a lot of branches that don't have that spread that's needed and that health and safety knowledge that's needed to properly scrutinise these risk assessments and make sure that they're suitable and sufficient. And so what the guidance attempts to do really is to give you a quick insight into the health and safety legislation that applies in this context. Sorry, can you hear me still? Yeah. So just, and also, it does touch on some technical terminology. And so the reason for the webinar is really to take you through this guidance and hopefully give you a little bit more confidence in applying some of this information locally when it comes to bargaining and negotiations. So hopefully you've seen the guidance. It does talk about employers' duties under various health and safety legislation. It doesn't cover everything because we don't want to overwhelm people, obviously. But an employer's key duty is to protect the health and safety of their employees and anyone else who comes into contact with their business. So they have to protect you from harm. They have to introduce protective and preventative measures. And Reg 3 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work regs requires them to conduct a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. So you'll see a lot of employers and unions talking about suitable and sufficient risk assessments. What constitutes a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks? And as reps, you will be invited in to comment on these risk assessments, and you may find that you look at them and you just don't know where to start. So hopefully today we can give you a little bit more support in that regard, or a bit more information. So how do we know a risk assessment is suitable and sufficient? So it should be conducted by a competent person. Now what that means, it's competency under the health and safety legislation. So the people who the employer appoints to conduct these risk assessments need to be familiar with the relevant legislation that applies, the relevant health and safety legislation that applies to those risk assessments. They should have the knowledge, ability and training and experience to make sure that all the hazards and risks are captured and they're properly evaluated. So as reps, that's one of the things that we can do to challenge employers, is to check that the people conducting these risk assessments are competent under the health and safety legislation. And if we have any concerns, then we can raise that to the employer, because it's their duty to put in place health and safety arrangements and to appoint suitably competent people to ensure they manage these risks. So in terms of the scope of a risk assessment, you'll see a lot of employers are starting with generic COVID-19 risk assessments, which is a good place to start. Of course, they then need to go into the local level. They need to look at activities that are taking place, venues, locations. So the whole scope is very broad. It has to look at who could be affected by the risk of transmission of COVID-19, but also associated risks such as mental health. And that can be a big risk factor. So what we want to do is make sure that the scope is there in these risk assessments. So have they captured all the potential hazards in the workplace? A hazard is obviously anything with potential to cause harm, and the risk level is what we evaluate, what we assess to be the likelihood that that harm will happen. And with COVID-19, we know that the symptoms of COVID-19, if people contract it, can range from mild to severe to fatal. And so with that in mind, the risk level is high, because the hazard, if someone was to contract it, that is potentially fatal. So it is a high risk in the workplace. The likelihood of someone contracting COVID-19, of course, depends on the controls that are in place. And so employers have a duty to follow under the regulations the principles of prevention. Now, this is often referred to as a hierarchy of control. And the first step in any risk assessment is to eliminate those risks. So at the moment, we have a lot of people who are quite able to work from home. And that is eliminating the risk to the extent that you are not required to be in the workplace, and you are not being exposed to the risk of transmission of COVID-19. So in terms of elimination, that is a good step. Once they start to move towards inviting people back into the workplace, then we have to ensure that the control levels reduce the risk to as low a level as is reasonably practicable. So the level that remains must remain low. It can't remain moderate or high. The risk of harm should remain low, and it should be as low as possible. So in terms of the hierarchy of control, as reps, we can make sure that they're starting with elimination as a first measure. And when we look at controls of the hazards, that they're reducing them through the way they work, changes to curriculum, changes to assessment, changes to anything that will reduce the likelihood of COVID-19 being transmitted within the workplace. And PPE is last on that list. And the reason for that is because it can fail. It's the least effective control measure out there. It requires proper fitting. It requires the right type of PPE. Are you trained to use it effectively? Is it, have you got the safe systems of work to know how to dispose of it, to clean it, to store it? A whole host of regulations are attached to PPE. So that is why it has to be the last possible control measure. And that is why in the NHS, for instance, it's used, because people in the NHS have to come into contact with people who have the virus and have to work in those situations. So you'll see from the FE guidance that we have 5 tests. Now, 3 of those tests are on government, and it does talk about a significantly reduced level of COVID-19. Now, what we know is that COVID-19 is widespread in the community. We don't have sufficient testing, track and trace in place. There's no way of preventing outbreaks. There's no way of tracking transmission in the workplace. And for that reason, the risk level is very high if we go back into the workplace. And so reps really need to push the idea of elimination through working from home and avoiding, where possible, any moves to bring workers back into the workplace other than key workers that are already there, essentially. And ideally, these discussions will start to take place at a time when it is safe, or when it is safer to return to the workplace. And right now, without these things in place, with the levels of transmission that we have and the lack of government systems to track and trace, it's just not a safe time, in our opinion. So as reps, we need to use the risk assessment process to really push for people remaining at home and for elimination of the potential risk that comes from contracting COVID-19. So once the employers have produced a risk assessment and consulted the trade unions, they do have to record their findings. And as you'll see, government is encouraging employers to publish those risk assessments and being transparent about it. Risk assessment, they have to follow a systematic approach. So if employers are doing these risk assessments anyway, they're consulting us, they're suitable and sufficient, they're capturing all the risks, they're controlling the risks to low levels or eliminating the risks, then why not publish these risk assessments? They have a duty to inform employees anyway of the risks that they are exposed to and the control measures, the preventative and protective control measures that employers have put in place to prevent their employees from coming to harm. So they already have to give that information out. In terms of consultation with reps, so the SRSC regs, the safety reps and safety committees regulations, apply in recognised workplaces. Health and safety reps have significant statutory rights. And it's for this reason that you'll see in the guidance that we recommend that branch negotiators and anyone involved in discussions around risk assessments or a safe return to the workplace are also appointed as health and safety reps. Now, you're not expected as a health and safety rep to have any particular level of expertise. You are expected to undertake training and to understand the risks involved in your workplace. The guidance suggests you should have been employed for 2 years, but actually there is no enforced requirement of the length of time, but you should be familiar enough with the risks that are presented in your workplace to be appointed a health and safety rep. And as a union, we will try and upskill you and put you on training, do more webinars to get you more competent and more confident in your roles in that respect. But to appoint yourself as a health and safety rep is important because you'll be in these negotiations and you'll have the rights afforded by the legislation, you'll have the rights to information, the rights to time off, the rights to consultation, and these are really powerful statutory rights. And there's also protections for health and safety reps as well. So as a rep, you can help the employer to identify more hazards. You can ensure there's a proper evaluation of the risk levels, that there's proper controls in place, that it's being conducted by someone who's competent, that they publish the results of the risk assessment, that they review regularly in consultation with yourselves the risk assessments so that they are consistently bringing these risk levels down to as low a level as possible. So you'll see in the guidance as well, we talk about a branch checklist. One of the first things on that checklist is a risk management framework. Now, the employer has to put in place sufficient health and safety arrangements to manage the risks presented in their workplace. And that will, show us who has what health and safety responsibilities and who's competent to implement safety measures. And we need to have this risk management framework in place for COVID-19 so that we can see if the employer is taking a robust approach to safety management, and so that we can consult on these approaches that employers are taking, and that will then feed in necessarily to the risk assessment process. One of the big issues that seems to be coming up is obviously the risk of serious and imminent danger. So obviously there is an individual right under the Employment Rights Act to remove yourself from a situation where you believe there is a serious and imminent risk to your health and safety. But it's an individual risk, and as unions we really want to collectivise this issue, and the best way to do that is through Regulation 8 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work regs. Now, that regulation requires employers to put in place procedures for serious and imminent danger. Now, you should as reps be checking that employers have done this, and if they haven't, or even if they have, you are consulted on those procedures. We want to protect members in advance so that they understand if a control measure fails, if they believe there's a serious risk of danger to their health and safety, that they know what procedure to follow and that they're not going to face repercussions or potential detriment for taking those actions. I mean, the scale of this issue is absolutely huge. You know, even once the risk assessments are implemented, we need to scrutinise employers. We need to make sure control measures are in place. We do need more health and safety reps in this regard, and we need more people to be involved to highlight to the employer any risks or hazards that are being presented that haven't been identified in risk assessments. And so the more that we can organise around this issue, the better. So I think I'll open it up to questions because I'm aware that we started late. And it's probably the best way to proceed after Andrew's come in, sorry, because Andrew wants to come in. But, you know, this webinar is just an initial introduction to this guidance. And I just want to be clear that we will be doing further webinars and we will be amending this guidance and adding additional links to help you in these sort of discussions. But I'm happy to introduce Andrew now and then hopefully move on to questions after that.
Thanks, Alex. Before Andrew comes in, just a couple of practical issues, if I can. Firstly, anyone who joined us late, if you're able to turn your camera off, that would really help with accessibility for people. If you just hover your mouse in the middle of the screen, you should be able to switch your camera off. There's a camera icon. If people aren't able to do that, then you can pin the speaker. If you click on
I cannot unmute. It's ridiculous.
Andrew, you need to mute.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Apologies.
We can hear
I won't mute just in case you can't unmute. And so you can click on the person who's speaking and pin them so that's the main person that you can see if you need to. I should have mentioned, if you are keeping your camera on, you are giving us kind of unspoken permission to feature in the recording, so just bear that in mind. And I can see some people have got their hands up. We're not able to take individual questions. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat bar, in the chat pane, and we will go through them afterwards and make sure that if there are any gaps in the guidance that they get updated. Okay, so thank you for that. Right, Andrew, fingers crossed. Can I bring you in, please?
Apologies if I did just use an expletive.
Oh, we seem to have lost you again. This is going swimmingly. We've lost Andrew for a second, so I'm just going to see if Sean is around and if you want to come in now, Sean. If you can keep it to a few minutes, that'd really help.
Hi, yes, I can. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks.
Right, okay. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's safe and well. Rather strange time to meet, but it's great to hear and see you all. Well, first of all, actually, I'd just like to start by offering a solidarity greetings, really, to the from the Further Education Committee to the NEU, because I think the NEU's campaign has been fantastic in relation to dealing with and fighting the government trying to force workers back, primary school workers in particular, on June the 1st. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. They've recruited over 17,000 new people in the last few weeks. And I also like to send solidarity greetings to those in Roehampton University and Croydon College who are facing redundancies at this moment in time. And of course, anybody else who faces that and anything we can do to support and support you in any way, please do let us know. The reason why I've been invited to speak here, not only because I'm the vice chair, but also because I want to try to explain a little bit about how we can go about collectivizing, I think what Alex talked about at the end, those ideas and experiences of implementing this health and safety approach. And we've come up, I think, with potential beginnings of a model in the college which I work at, which is the Capital City College Group in North London, which stretches across London, actually. And of course, hopefully there are better models and examples which we can share. But I will be obviously sending some of this stuff out and hopefully it'd be useful to you. Today, we managed to get an agreement with our union, with our management, to send out a joint statement. The joint statement is one which basically argues and is setting up a COVID-19 working group. This working group will be looking at every aspect of the work which Alex has just talked about, both in terms of health and safety in work, but also health and safety at home, because I think this is a big issue which is increasingly becoming important. And also looking at how curriculum delivery. I think it's worth saying here that first of all, though, is this. We, our management have made it clear that first of all, nobody is going back into June the 1st. They will take the DFE advice, but they're also taking out the 5 test advice. Part of the statement we sent out today will clearly makes clear that the 5 tests which UCU, NEU and others have put forward, as well as the DFE advice and the Health and Safety Committee Executive's advice, as all those things will inform any movement forward to getting us back to work safely. So I think that's important. First step, have a look at our 5 tests. Let's make sure they're on the table in those meetings and getting management to agree that they'll take those into consideration. Of course, the first 3 are more objective ones, but the last 2 are very much more subjective. But also what our management has made it clear to us, and others in London have done the same, there will be no going back in this side of September. It'll be crazy for anybody to do so. But also what they're saying is really from September at least until January, they cannot foresee any situation in reality that there'll be any back to work normality. They're talking at best 40% of people back. Even that's going to be difficult. So the vast majority of remote learning will continue. I mean, Cambridge University today, people might have said they will be having all remote learning right through to 2021. And our college management are saying we just don't know. This could last even longer than past January. So it's worth thinking about that. A lot of employers are saying these things, and the quicker we know about exactly what we're looking for, it's very difficult to come up with a plan if we don't know exactly what we're looking to do in September and later. So those are a couple of things I'd first like to say. So that's CCG. So we'd send the joint statement out. I think it's just a beginnings of that where we got together. I think how we forced upon them, I think is important here. First of all, what we did was we threatened to 8 weeks ago, if they didn't shut down the college early, then we'll be not coming in because it was
unsafe.
Would you start
to wrap up now, please?
I will do.
Thank you.
I will do indeed. And that is something in which we very successfully push management to do that. And I advise that because what management are doing at the moment, they are looking at us because many of them don't want to keep the places open. They certainly don't want us to be going back. So they're in many ways. So they're looking for us to give them an excuse in some cases not to do so. So don't be frightened of that if that's the case. Get a Zoom meeting off the ground. If you don't know how to do that, do get in contact with your regional officers or national ones, so they can let people know what we're trying to do. And the final point is this, Chair, is curriculum delivery, because what we also said today was this: any attempt to try and put down a top-down model of how any curriculum delivery will take place next year in remote will simply not work. It must start, beginning and end with the curriculum areas themselves. Staff must have ownership over those delivery models, and that is something we will agree. So we'll send this stuff out. We hope it's a useful guideline. If there are better ones, please send those and share those as well. But collectivizing this stuff is the key to it. We must get it clear. We will not go back into unsafe workplace.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks. Really appreciate that. That's great. Okay, so fingers crossed, third time lucky. Andrew, are you able to speak?
I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Okay, yeah, it's been quite stressful. Look, I guess there's a few things. I would have started with talking about the 5 tests that we set. We set those for 2 purposes. One was political. We wanted to make sure that we were in step with NEU and the other school teaching unions, because obviously the focus is on what's happening there. Our tests match and mirror theirs. And so that means the first 3 tests are actually things which are outside the control in the main of college management. We know and understand that, but obviously when we've got parts of the country where infections are increasing, not decreasing, and there isn't the testing in place, and there isn't those tests being matched, then it's important that they are being used as a measure and a threshold for any return. And we will obviously never want to undermine the position of the NEU and the school teaching unions. And to a large degree, what happens next is going to be determined by that debate, which is live and going on. We're used to the fact that further education doesn't get as much attention, isn't in the same limelight, but we thought it important to tests as well. Obviously, the last two of those 5 tests are much more related to what college management decide to do locally. And I know Alex will have talked through with you the guidance that we released last week with those 5 tests. And so just today, and we will send an email link to it after this, we've released another 5. The number 5 is quite magic, it seems, at the moment. But 5, we call them 5 Ws. And this is because I don't know about anybody else. I feel like we're going through something. Well, I know we're all going through something we've never been through before. So we are having to find new ways to support each other and make sure that we feel confident having conversations about stuff we've never encountered before. So when we are starting to have those conversations with management, and I agree with what Sean said, there is no, and I've not heard of any FE institution talking about 1 June, but there are some FE institutions who are trying to push too fast and too hard on this, and that's why we need to get people having the conversations around the 3 Ws. And the 3 Ws are, the first one is who. Who are they proposing to bring back? Which students and which staff? And what are the attributes of those students that mean that they need to come back? What are the attributes of the staff? And what does that mean in terms of their potential risks that they'll be exposed to by being brought back? You then move on to, after the who, the why. Well, why exactly do those students need to come back? Is there an alternative way that they can be, that we can teach them? If that is not adequate, why isn't it adequate? And how can we make it adequate? A proper forensic analysis of the rationale and the reason why some provision is being brought back at the moment. If we get to a point where we, the union, can understand and accept the why, then I guess the question is the where. Which buildings are they going to go to? What parts of the campus are they going to go to, students and staff, so that we can identify the areas that are going to have to be looked at in terms of the next step, which is the what. And the what is the really important bit, which Alex has already spoken about. That's the bit of what does safe working look like? What does safe traveling to work look like? And so that's all the risk assessment stuff that Alex will have already spoken to you about. But also, yeah, it's getting to the point of identifying the places where physical distancing won't make it safe and can't. So you've got to look at PPE and then making sure that you've got a reliable source of that before you can actually agree and sign off on, I suppose, in a sense, agree with safe ways of working in that place. And then, only then, should we be talking about the when. So this is where the government's got ahead of itself, and it's labelled the 1st of June for schools. And I think that we're seeing that play out. Within FE, the government has not been anywhere near as prescriptive. There are colleges out there who are saying there will be no return until September. I know Sean talked about one. There are others. That's not the only one. I think that they are wanting us to take a firm stand. When I talk to colleagues at the Association of Colleges, they do want to see and share our advice. At the national level, they talk in a manner that seems like it's adopting our approach. But I know there are differences out there. I know there are colleges who are trying to make a name for themselves or do whatever, and we need to address those. So the 5 Ws are quite important in terms of the way we approach those conversations locally about any return to work. I've kind of lost my my order here, so I don't know whether I've there's other stuff that hasn't been covered, so we may need to perhaps go over to the questions, and maybe if we go to question 2 first, I can have a look at the other one.
Yeah, that's fine, Andrew. Thank you for that. Just reminder to everyone, sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo now. Could you just use the chat pane for questions rather than comments, please? It's too hard for people to follow and we're not going to be able to answer them anyway. If you can just, any questions that you've got, we'll make sure that we look at the guidance after this session. So the first question is for you then, Alan. Does the employer have to involve UCU in carrying out a risk assessment?
Hi, Jenny. Yeah, I'm also experiencing a lot of echo, so maybe if people make sure they're muted, that might help. So yes, they do have to consult you as a recognised union in the workplace. The employer's got a duty to involve union appointed and or elected health and safety reps in the risk assessment process. You know, they have to consult unions in all health, safety and welfare matters that could have a substantial impact on employees. They have to consult us on the arrangements for the appointment of competent persons, and any information that the employer is obliged to give by law to employees, unions should be consulted on that as well. And, you know, we should also be consulted on health and safety training, some of the control measures that might be implemented in these risk assessments. You may say that, well, staff need training in this procedure, staff need training in this safe system of work. We can be consulted under the regulations on what the health and safety training looks like and how it's delivered and who it's delivered by, etc. And the same goes for any introduction of new technology in the workplace. So these are really powerful statutory rights to consultation contained in the safety reps and safety committees regulations, and we should take full advantage of that. And as I say, make sure you're appointed the health and safety rep.
Thanks, Alex. The next one does follow on from that. So if I can come to you again, Alex, does the risk assessment have to be agreed with the unions? You might have covered that already.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So could you ask that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So the question is, does the risk assessment have to be agreed with the unions?
Okay, so the risk assessment doesn't have to be agreed with the unions, but the employers do have to consult with us on the risk assessments to meet their duties under the health and safety legislation. So they've got a duty of care towards staff to prevent them from harm while at work, and we play a key role in ensuring that all potential hazards are captured and eliminated or controlled to low levels through the risk assessment process. If we feel this is not happening, we can take appropriate action to escalate the matter where needed. And this is where you need to keep in close contact with regional officers to ensure that any rogue employers are dealt with quickly.
Thank you very much. So the next question, again, I'll stay with you, Alex, because it's on the same topic, if that's all right, if you hope you've got water with you. Does staff have the right to see the risk assessment?
So, yeah, so the legislation actually states that staff have to be given information on from the employer on all the risks and hazards and the protective and preventative measures that are put in place to control them. And, you know, any workplace with 5 or more employers have to, you know, record the findings of those risk assessments. So it doesn't especially dictate what that risk assessment form looks like. But yes, they do have to let staff know, you know, the results of those risk assessments, the risks they've identified, the hazards they've identified, and the control measures that are in place. And so it's quite easy to just publish the risk assessment as it is, so staff can see that. What's the point in having a risk assessment if staff don't understand what controls should be in place and then can't take issue or raise concerns if they find that those controls are not adequate or not implemented?
Okay, thank you. I think you've earned a break there, Alex. I'll come back to Andrew if you're ready, Andrew. The first question that we wanted to cover was, if the employer ignores our concerns and instructs staff to attend work, what can we do?
Well, I think it's the same scenario as it is with any other situation where the employer is doing something that we are not content with. We need to escalate it, and we need to organise. We need to use all of the procedures available to us in terms of failure to agree. We need to make sure every member understands what is going on. We need to make sure that we advise members that we've not been consulted, that we do not believe that the risk assessments are suitable and sufficient. And I think if we get to a situation where we find that there are members who believe that they're in genuine and imminent danger, we've got to advise them about their rights under Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act and how they can assert it. We need to let them know that scenario. We've got to tread a tight line because we can't tell them in terms of what they should do in terms of not returning to work, but we can certainly tell them the failures of the employer and what the employer hasn't done that we believe could create a situation where they're not safe. But the rights, sadly, It's not the legislation that we would have written as a trade union movement. It wasn't written by us. Falls on the individual to take that action. If we actually make a recommendation collectively, then we risk putting individuals in the legal position of breach of contract. Now, we will, of course, recommend that all branches that are finding themselves in that situation contact their regional office and will provide all support. I would say that the mood of the country at the moment, and you only need to watch one of the nightly COVID updates, the mood of the country at the moment is not to go into that place. The mood of the country at the moment, and the narrative, surprisingly perhaps, by this Tory government, is that that employers should all be working closely with their trade unions, and we are also finding that even places where we're not recognised, they are engaging because they're heeding that message. Now, I'm not saying it's all perfect out there by no means, but we should be using every effort to bring employers to consult with us collectively, because collectively is where we find our strength. Resorting to the law, as we've known for a long time, is not where we find our strength.
Thank you, Andrew. That's brilliant. Okay, so coming back to Alex, the next question is linked back to the risk assessment. So what if we don't agree with what the employer puts in terms of risks or control measures?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. So yeah, the law requires employers to eliminate or reduce risks to low levels to ensure your workplaces are safe. If we feel this is not the case, we need to be clear with the employers on what controls we think would reduce the risk to low levels. And the employer must explain why these are not reasonably practicable for them to implement. And that is a very difficult thing, I think, for the employers to justify in these circumstances. So if risk levels remain high, in our view, then we need to escalate the matter in order to protect employees from serious harm. And I think we've discussed, obviously involving regional officers in that discussion as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And this might be following on from the question put to Andrew, and I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Alex. Can individual staff refuse to attend the workplace if they think it is unsafe?
Yeah, so that is pretty much covered by what Andrew's discussed. But yes, staff have that individual right. If they feel they are at risk of serious or imminent danger, then they can remove themselves from potential harm under Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act. And they're protected from any detriment in enforcing this individual right. I think, as Andrew's indicated, we need to ensure that we collectivise that issue in the sense of Reg 8 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work Act, and putting in place suitable procedures so that we don't put people in these difficult circumstances where they've got to potentially suffer any detriment for removing themselves from the workplace. But we can inform members of that right. We just need to be careful that it doesn't appear that as a union we're inducing them in any way to take any collective action around Section 44, because that is where we're not legally strong, essentially.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is, can we carry out our own risk assessments independently from the employer?
Sorry, I keep muting myself and forgetting that I'm in a Q&A. So can we carry out our own risk assessments independently? Well, it's the employer's legal duty to carry out the suitable and sufficient risk assessments for the workplace. It's not our duty to do that. They have to implement the necessary control measures, but as a union, we can ensure that those risk assessments are robust, they are systematic, they're continually updated and reviewed to eliminate the risks or keep them to low levels and as low as reasonably practicable. The employer is the one who has to ensure that controls are implemented, and we scrutinise the risk assessments. There doesn't seem to be any benefit in conducting our own, other than if you're talking about inspections and investigations and so on.
Okay, and who should members inform of any risks that they identify?
Right, so you know, under the health and safety legislation, employees have a duty to inform the employer of any risks, any hazards that they spot within the workplace. So you know, there should be mechanisms for doing that. You should be aware of the health and safety arrangements on how to report these risks and hazards to the employer, but ultimately it's their duty to protect you from harm. And so you do have a duty as well as an employee to inform employers of these hazards and risks that you see in the workplace.
Sorry, I did the same thing with my muting then. Okay, I've got one final pre-prepared question here, which is, should health and safety reps be attending the workplace to carry out a risk assessment?
Oh yeah, so the legislation doesn't require reps to attend the workplace to carry out a risk assessment. You know, you've got a good understanding of the potential hazards in your workplace. You can consult with employees and your members to ensure that all hazards and risks are captured and that they're effectively controlled. Given the risks of COVID-19 and the risk of transmission, I think there will be a lot more, a lot less, you know, walkthroughs and, you know, requirements to be on site to conduct a risk assessment. A lot of these things, remember, are preventative. So you're not going out there to spot a hazard in action. You're going out, you know, you're considering potential hazards in the workplace, potential risks, because it's preventative ultimately.
Thanks so much, Alex. That's really, really helpful. Can I just bring Andrew back in to see if you've got anything to add to any of that?
I think the only thing I was going to say, because I was a bit wrong-footed earlier, is there is some work going on with the Association of Colleges in terms of looking for an agreement around some sort of nationally agreed framework for how we structure discussions locally. They appear to be suggesting that they would be really keen for that. So all of the FE trade unions are working on a redraft of some NEU guidance to try and make it ready for FE. So we'll be pursuing that with the AOC nationally, mainly because if it helps where there are rogue employers, that you can waive something from the AOC in front of them, that would be useful. I suppose the other thing is I've been saying to a lot of people, it's about any return to work at whatever time. I mean, at the moment, we're not talking about the when, we're talking about the how and the what, you know, and all the other W's. It's about giving people confidence that it's safe, confidence that it's been done the right way. And we're saying to all of the colleges, and we'll be writing to all colleges again tomorrow. I know some regions have already done that, but all tomorrow, setting out our expectations from a UCU perspective of what we expect from them, and we expect them to have us right at the table at early doors, looking at all the risk assessments and working with them, so that they can get it right, so we can get it right together. I think the other part of the confidence is that there'll be people out there who aren't even members of UCU, who aren't members of any union, who won't have the confidence to go back until they know the union has signed off and sort of said it's safe and has been part of the process. And I think that's the reason why we're seeing the government doing what they're doing. So bringing it right back down to branch level, I think letting members know, bringing members together and letting members know what the union is doing at a local level to actually engage with the employer and how we're consulting, advising them of where we're up to is going to be really reassuring and provide a lot of confidence. I think that at the moment, we've got a lot of employers who are putting out surveys of staff and asking them how they feel and how they might feel about coming back and what they might need. The reality is a lot of members obviously are not skilled up as health and safety representatives, and they don't know what is and isn't safe. And so we need to work with the employer to work out exactly what is and isn't safe. And if they won't work with us, then we need to make members understand that that's what's going on and give them the confidence to understand what their legal rights are. So I think it's all about building confidence, both in terms of working with the employer, but I think where it's going wrong, we need to be able to build the confidence of our members. And I think holding meetings and bringing them together, doing your own local version of this is going to become really, really important over the next few weeks. Because when those surveys go out, the Department for Education has asked schools, and I know colleges are starting to do it now as well, an audit of which staff would be available to come back when there is a reopening. And so that's what some of the surveys are about. They're asking people how they feel, would they come back? They're asking the other valid questions about vulnerability to COVID-19 within their household, within their family and themselves. But the minute those surveys land in our members' inboxes, there are members out there who are fearful and anxious, and rightly so, and they assume that this means we're going back on the 1 June or we're going back very, very soon. We need to get the employers to a position where they accept we're not going back until we agree that it's safe. And we're not going to talk about the date that we go back until we've agreed what safe looks like.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. I'm glad you said survey, because I've written it in big letters and put a box around it, and I've still not mentioned it. If anybody hasn't yet filled in the UCU survey that's been sent out, it's an individual and a unique link in your email that is associated with your UCU account. Please do check that, and please do fill it in, because it's really going to help us in terms of understanding what's happening in lots of different colleges. So encourage your members to do the same. That would be great. Okay, Andrew, please go ahead.
Sorry, one thing I left out, and that is that, look, we are all approaching things that we've never had to deal with before. So do not hesitate to reach out to your regional office. They may not thank me for saying this, but you know, if you're coming across things you're not quite sure how to deal with, or the employer is not playing ball, then please get your regional office involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention that the survey closes on Friday at 5 p.m. So please don't hang about with that one. Right, Alex, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I can see a few questions that I could quickly answer. I don't know if we've got time to
We've got about 5 minutes. It's difficult because everything's been coming in quite quickly. If there's anything that you can see that you could answer really quickly, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so got a question from Gina, and she says, in prisons, should we be able to access the risk assessments that the prison has done of the areas that the staff have to use to get to their place of work, e.g. the gate area? So simple answer is yes. The Reg 12 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work regs requires that, so the prison employers, so HMPPS, so anyone working on their premises, the employers must provide comprehensible information on the risks to health and safety and the necessary control measures to the employers of their employees working on their premises. So they should be informing your employer of the risks and the control measures that they've put in place so that you can also follow them. So that is essential, and that is required in the legislation.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm not sure if there's any others.
Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 more if you can, like I say, if they're straightforward, maybe I need to do with the risk assessments.
In the meantime, I'll just say it's not the intention that this will necessarily be the only or last one of these. If it's been useful and helpful and the feedback is good, then obviously we will do more of these. We've unfortunately obviously had to limit numbers today, so we'll probably do another one at least to catch up with those. So
Robert has asked, is there a model risk assessment that branch reps could refer to? I've seen an NEU checklist for primary schools, which seems very detailed, including things like lidded bins and classrooms. So yes, the intention is to update our guidance. So I want to put in a link to, you know, obviously it's a non-exhaustive list of potential hazards and potential controls that might need to be considered in these sort of risk assessments. There is a Northern Ireland risk assessment template with some idea of the sort of considerations of hazards that will need to be considered by employers, and that is linked into that FE guidance document. But I do intend to put our own sector-specific issues in there just to help. And obviously we can add to that, and you can obviously identify your own. The important thing is that you identify your own hazards and risks that are specific to your workplace or the activities taking place there and the people that are involved.
Thanks, Alex. There's one more on risk assessments that I've seen from Laura that says, should individual branches be sending risk assessments to the regional office, especially if reps are new, having had little training?
Yeah, so I mean that's happening at the moment, as far as I'm aware. You know, the regional offices don't want you to be agreeing to risk assessments that are not fit for purpose. So if you need support, then yeah, you need to contact the regional offices for support in that regard. I mean, hopefully, you know, things like this today, the webinars, if there's any ideas for webinars, we want to try and capture as many people as possible to help you get upskilled. And if there's any information we can put out there, because there is a lot of demand on the regional officers, but you do need to be making sure that these risk assessments are suitable and sufficient, and that we're contributing to them effectively.
That's great, thank you. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Apologies to anyone who hasn't had their question answered. Just to reiterate, your regional office is there, or your devolved nation office is there to support you. If you, as a branch officer, are worried, if you're not sure whether or not something is sufficient, etc., if you don't understand the things that have been explained today, please do get in touch with your regional and devolved nations office, and they can certainly answer your questions that you've got. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Alex and to Andrew for managing to get through those technological issues. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much to everyone at UCU. If people knew how much work has gone into this, I think you would probably understand where we're coming from. And as Andrew says, we're hoping it's not going to be the last one. So thank you so much, everybody, for your attention and for your questions. And they will be reviewed in terms of the guidance to see if there are any gaps in the guidance and to add to the frequently asked questions. So thank you very much. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And I'm sure we'll meet again soon. Cheers.